Bruce, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
You started learning the piano and trumpet at the age of 5, and I noticed in most interviews there was a jump, and you talk about going to college and studying composition. Can I just maybe delve into that area a little bit and ask you, did you take piano lessons? I know you came from a very musical family, but did you have a private piano teacher, and how extensive was your musical training in your childhood and teenage years?
Well, my family was pretty musical. I mean, it wasn't their business, but my family worked for the Salvation Army, which has a huge music program. So that was why I had to learn trumpet. Piano, I wanted to learn. And I was in my family, my mother, my father, my brother. My brother was a professional trombone player, but we all played brass, we all played piano. My grandparents were all musical. One of my grandfathers was a composer, and I had an uncle who was a songwriter. So we had a lot of music around. I was interested in piano, and I took lessons. Gosh, I took lessons all the way through university. But by the time I got to the university, I know this sounds this sounds a little egocentric, and I don't mean it to be, but I was as good as I wanted to be.
Right.
And I didn't want to become a pianist. I had a pretty good technique. I was a really good sight reader. And so when I got to college, I really didn't know what to study. I didn't have any ambition at that point to do anything particular. And I thought, well, I'll take music because music's familiar to me. And I think I'll take composition because it's the one thing that I don't know as well as the other stuff.
No, wait, Bruce, can I just jump in for a quick second? You took piano lessons all the way. Did you play a lot of piano as a kid? Did you play in like bands growing up?
No. I played strictly classical piano. I never played in a band. I never played jazz. I never played rock and roll. I mean, I could read a lead sheet, but you wouldn't want to hear me play for too long. Doing that kind of, I mean, I don't do any piano stylians, and I don't improvise and all that stuff. I was strictly a classical guy. And I was sort of an indoor boy. I wasn't into sports and all that kind of stuff. So I would sit and I'd practice for an hour or two. It was no big deal. I used to like it. And what I used to really like doing was sight reading. I would pick up new music and I'd go through it. And I realized later when I got to college, that's why I became a really good sight reader. I had some other friends who were really good pianists, but they couldn't sight read.
How did you get so good at sight reading? Is that something you just actively did for many years?
Yeah. The only way you can get good at sight reading is to read. I'll give you an example. When I became a composer, I was, as I say, I was a good sight reader for piano and all this stuff. But when I became a composer, I was interested in studying orchestral scores. So I started to read orchestral scores. Now, I don't do that really well, but I remember struggling for weeks trying to get through one of the Rachmaninoff symphonies. And, you have to read all the transpositions, you have to figure out all the lines, and you have to, make the whole thing sound like something.
Wow. So, Bruce, are you talking about reducing an entire orchestral score into a piano part on the spot?
At the piano, yeah. But after that, playing a piano part is really easy because you're only playing 2 lines.
Yeah.
So I've talked to my wife about this. She's a violinist. She plays primarily movies and television, all that kind of stuff. And she was a great sight reader. And we both agree the way to learn to be a sight reader is you just have to read a lot. You just have to push yourself to read a lot, over and over and over again. It's just practice. It's like everything else. It's just practice.
Do you have any advice for fingering, a hand position when sight reading? Are there any tips there?
No. I used to do things, and my piano teacher would look at me and say, well, you can't do that. And I said, well, why not? Because it works, And he says, well, that's not good fingering. And I said, yeah, but it works, And so I don't know. I mean, there's some things you just actually, I never worried about fingering. If I had to really learn a piece and there was something a little rocky, I would work out the fingering and I would find the best ways of doing it. But you learn things like you don't put your thumb on the black keys and you learn the basic scales and things. I don't know. I mean, I was just able to read anything. I mean, to read anything. I wouldn't be able to sit down and read the Liszt Transcendental Etudes, at speed, but I could read them slowly.
Yep.
And most of Bach I could get around, and Beethoven sonatas, except for the late ones, which are really hard to play. No, I could play most of that stuff.
Okay, so now let me ask a second question about your childhood. What kind of music were you listening to growing up and in your family and in your teenage years?
Well, because of the Salvation Army stuff, I listened to a lot of brass band music. That was one. But the other kind of music I would listen to primarily was classical music. Now, when I was about 12 or 13, I started listening to pop radio. I remember listening to Elvis and, when Elvis just started and all that kind of stuff. But that was heavily discouraged, heavily discouraged by particularly by my dad, which was pretty funny because when my dad was a kid, he was he even referred to himself as a groupie for Glenn Miller, in the 40s.
Yep.
And his father, who was the composer, told him, "You shouldn't listen to that junk, in my house." And my father did the same thing to me. So I got to know a bunch of pop music, but I couldn't tell you who did what. I mean, I know the Elvis stuff, but when it came to the bands from in the 50s and the 60s, I was aware of the music, but I couldn't tell you who played what. So if you say, "Did you like Jefferson Airplane?" I said, "Yeah, probably. Play me something, and I'll tell you whether I know it or not." I didn't learn all the acts. I just learned the music. So that's sort of my background and that kind of stuff. I really was not geared towards commercial music at all. It was when I was about 16, 17, I was listening to Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, and I remember listening to The Rite of Spring, I think in my last year of high school, and thinking, "Oh, that's different," But it took me a while. When I went to college, I'd say that I had Tchaikovsky ears. I was very comfortable listening to Tchaikovsky and the 19th century romantic stuff and all the guys before that, all the stuff that I'd played. As I got out of school and got into commercial writing, I started listening to other people because I needed to stretch my ears. So I think when I left college, I was just getting accustomed to Bartók and more Stravinsky and Penderecki was hot at that time, and guys like that. So
okay, let's jump now to your college days, and you studied composition, and it's very humorous how you put it. You're so I guess modest in how you describe yourself. So you just decided on composition because you apparently didn't know what you would do.
I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. Listen. I've said this before to other people, but when I was a boy, the only ambition I really had, and it was a big ambition, was to be an animator.
Right.
So I wanted to work for Walt Disney and draw, animation, all that kind of stuff. I finally put that away when I was about 15 or 16 and just focused on the piano. So, but I didn't have any professional ambition for either the piano. I started composing when I was about 12 or 13.
That's what I wanted to ask you. You were a great sight reader and player and pianist, but did you also improvise and compose in your youth?
I didn't improvise, but I did compose, and it was hard because I really didn't know what I was doing, which, look, to sum it all up, when I look back on what I did, why I didn't become an animator and why I became a composer, being an animator and being a composer isn't that different. I met several animators who, when they were kids, wanted to be in music, or they have musician brothers or cousins who wanted to be animators when they were kids. There are a lot of people who go back and forth between those two things. I think that the reason I became a good sight reader was so that I could read new music, so I could see how it was written, how it was composed. I think that I was always looking at new music because I just wanted to see how it was put together. And it wasn't until I started taking lessons, like in college, and I took some private lessons, that I really started to become a composer to see how I could do it. And you think it's modesty. It's not so much modesty as I knew that I really didn't have. I was no prodigy, believe me. I could occasionally write a pretty good piece, but when I went into television, because I was working all the time in television, all the time, it was the same as practicing the piano over and over. If you're going to be a good composer, you've got to practice. You've got to write a lot of music. The same thing as if you're going to be an instrumentalist, you have to practice. You have to play your instrument. You have to get lessons from people who can help you with the techniques and help you over the things that people stumble over as they're learning things. So it's I don't find it remarkable. I had a penchant for music, and I was very familiar with music because of my family. But I mentioned my brother was a trombone player. When we were in high school, he played we lived in Honolulu, and he played in I think it was a city audition for solo musicians or something like that. He was like 16 years old, and he played great. When he was 16, he played great, and he lost the competition to a kid who didn't play as well. And the reason he was told that he didn't give he didn't get the award was because to him it came too easily. This other kid had to really struggle for it.
Oh my God.
And my brother was really ticked off at that because he really had to. I mean, he had to really practice. I remember how he used to play the trombone over and over and over, and he played out of the trumpet books. I mean, he worked really hard for his technique. I used to accompany him all the time, so we used to play together. So he sounded like it was effortless, but he was working hard.
Okay, that's a little thing you dropped. You accompanied him. Did you also play any kind of chamber music growing up?
No, I did a lot of accompanying because I could read, so if somebody wanted me to play, like when I got into college, I lived in Honolulu and I was taking piano lessons at the University of Hawaii. And occasionally, somebody would say, I need an accompanist, can you play it? And then later on, when I could accompany, I would, because I always enjoyed it. I always thought that was kind of a lot of fun to do.
Right. Okay, so now in college, you started to learn the craft of composition. Now, theory is something it's very interesting because in some ways, theory is taught very differently in the different eras of, I guess, human music. I feel like in the 19th and the 18th century, there's a very apprenticeship-like model towards teaching theory and music. It was very practical. And now as we get more modern, it's almost very esoteric in a way. Could you describe your study of composition, the craft, harmony, counterpoint, and what you got out of it?
Well, again, going back to the Salvation Army thing, we had summer camps, we had music camps, and I learned my basic theory at music camp. I learned it when I was like 10, 12 years old. I learned about intervals, I learned about chords, chord progressions a little bit, but basic theory I learned, when I was a kid. When I got into college, they placed me in Theory 1, which was basically having to do what I had learned when I was 10 and 11 years old.
Right.
So I got out, I changed schools primarily because of that. I ended up at USC in Los Angeles. What I found out, I think I had a good theory background. I didn't study counterpoint, which I'm sorry I didn't, because I had to learn it the hard way by practicing it. But I had a private teacher who was very well trained, European trained, and he used to beat me over the head with my theory. What I've found, I've done a lot of teaching over the last several years, and what I've found is that, similar to what you said, theory isn't very well learned, and it's not, I think people think that we don't have to pay attention to it anymore. But I find that my students who have gone through school, come in, I've taught graduate students that if I asked them to write a melody, one, they would have a hard time writing a melody. A really hard time writing a melody. And what they consider to be a melody is pretty weird. And then they have a really hard time harmonizing it. And if they could harmonize it, which they mostly can't, they wouldn't know how to arrange it. They just don't know the basic stuff. So when I have students now, a lot of whom are interested in getting into the movies, I start beating them on the head to write better tunes, better melodies. I charge them to write better harmonies and how to find better harmonies and how to do better harmonies. I teach them about bass lines. I teach them about inversions and how to use, just basic stuff. And it's amazing, these guys are like 22, 23 years old. They just don't know this, and they're so thankful. They're so grateful. Oh, I didn't know how to do that, because their teachers don't know how to do it either,
Yes.
I'm interested in what you said about the way people used to learn it in the 17th and 18th century, 19th century, because these guys, when you look at the music written at that time, these guys really knew what they were doing. Like I was showing somebody yesterday a Tchaikovsky score. When you look at a guy like Tchaikovsky, that guy had a really good technique. He knew harmonically exactly what he was doing. Wagner had a good technique. Mozart had a good technique. Like Bach, I wish I had a technique as good as Bach's, but that guy, wherever he learned it, he learned it as a kid. He learned as a young guy, because by the time he started writing and he was in his 20s, already he was writing substantial music, I find that's a negative thing today, because I don't think that people respect it. People don't respect melodies, that's for sure. They don't respect thematics. Melodies are hard to come up with.
Right. Well, Bruce, it's interesting. Your training and the practical work you did, you almost mimic like an 18th century musician who had to work and learn at the same time. And we now know, I think within the last 15 years, thanks to a lot of musicological research with things like Partimento and the Italians, they learned how to harmonize bass lines with these things called Partimenti, and they worked from the age of, for 10 years they did this, and that carried on into the Paris Conservatory, where they worked for, like, someone like Debussy would learn how to harmonize bass lines and work and do a very practical thing. But what really struck me was, and I'm going to ask you this, Bruce, I noticed that, for instance, these Italian composers, if you asked them to write an opera, they could knock it out in 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm assuming that you're exactly like that. If you had a commission to write a film, you could do it quickly because you've had the practical training to write fast.
Sure. Because we're working on deadlines, I mean, I used to work on the TV show Quincy. It went for 5 years. I think I did 4 years of it. And the schedule for Quincy was that on Friday, every Friday, I would go look at a new show. The following Monday, 3 days later, I would record it with an orchestra. And following Wednesday, it would go on the air. So we did that. We did that for 4 years. I mean, that was how fast it was, And there were other guys who wrote a lot more music than I did in at least that much time, if not less. You learn to write quickly. I have a friend. Who writes really, really, really quickly, and Dennis McCarthy. Yeah, Dennis has done a lot of television, and you'd probably know him from Star Trek and things like that. Dennis could write 8, 9, 10, 12 minutes of music a day, which I cannot do. And I asked him one time, I said, Dennis, how do you write that much music? And it's good, it's good, it works great. I said, how do you write that much music? He said, the secret is once you turn over a page, you never go back.
How did you get so quick at writing music? And then obviously doing it makes you faster. But can you tell in your life, when was that moment in time where you noticed a noticeable increase in speed in your writing?
I can't say that I ever did that. What I did was pretty much what everybody else does. You find out you've got 20 minutes of music to write. You have 4 days to write it. So that means you're going to write 5 minutes a day. And that's basically, and you don't go to sleep until you write your 5 minutes. Now, if you get done quickly, which you generally wouldn't after 5 minutes, if I got done quickly and I got my 5 minutes done by, let's say, 10 o'clock at night, I'd go to bed. But if I didn't get my 5 minutes done until 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd stay up until I got it done. That was just it. You just write. I spent a lot of long hours when I was doing television. I'd start writing around 9 o'clock in the morning, and I would go until 1 or 2 in the morning. I would stop for breakfast and lunch and dinner and all that kind of stuff, and I'd see my kids and all that. But basically, I was doing 12 to 14-hour days, and that's not just me. That's what people do when they're doing that kind of work. I mean, everybody has done all-nighters. I remember writing one time and finishing just as the sun was coming up. What I was writing wasn't very energetic. It wasn't the best stuff I ever wrote, but I did it. I mean, sometimes I would take 15-minute naps at 3 o'clock in the morning, just to be able to get to 5 o'clock, just so I could finish. And you just do that. You just push and push and push and push. As I've gotten older, right, I can't do that. I was talking to Jerry Goldsmith one time, and he was 15 years older than I was, but. And I admired him a lot. And I said, geez, Jerry, I'm working on this movie and I'm getting so tired. And he said, well, go to bed. He said, if you go to bed, you'll figure it out in the morning. And I found out actually that was very good advice. Sometimes you get really tired and you just can't think of things. And the best thing you can do is just go to bed.
Bruce, do you write at the piano?
Yeah. To be honest with you, yes, mostly. But I have done some scores done on computers where I sit at an electric keyboard and I do it with sequencers and all that kind of stuff. But my favorite way is working at the piano, because at the piano, I mean, look, when I first started work, I started working for CBS Television. I worked there for 10 years. I was in management, but I did some writing while I started my writing when I worked at CBS. We had an 18-piece orchestra. It didn't matter what instruments you used, but you couldn't use more than 18. If you wanted to use 16 French horns and 2 tubas, that was fine. Just make it work for the show. It didn't matter. So I also learned that every time I did a show, I decided to change my orchestra run. I wasn't going to work with a standard orchestra all the time. Otherwise, I knew I was going to start to rewrite the same ideas because it was for the same combination. So I always changed the orchestra. When I worked on Dallas, a show which was basically the same from one week to the next, I always changed the orchestra, always changed the setup of the orchestra. That way, I would learn something new. I could make my mistakes. I could make my corrections, but I wouldn't be writing the same stuff all the time. So, but I always did it at the piano. So I got to know what the French horn sounded like at the piano. I got to know what the flute sounds like at the piano. I mean, and I got all those areas in my head. And of course, I learned what the instruments sound like in themselves as well. But I got very accustomed to what things sound like at the piano. When I go to an electronic instrument like a electronic keyboard, it's not a piano. It has different overtones. It doesn't sound as specific, and I find it's a lot harder writing specifically or writing really creatively when you're doing synthesized stuff, unless you're using synthesized sounds and goofy sounds and sound effects. But just to write an orchestral score on a sampler, I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's just.
So you're
miserable.
saying, Bruce, that even though now you can really get high quality samples on your keyboard through your computer, that's not helpful to you?
No, and I can tell you why. A sample is just a recording, right? So if you have a clarinet sample and you press, let's say, F, and you're going to hear a clarinet, then you press the F again. You're going to hear the same clarinet played exactly the way it was played before. You press it again, same thing, exactly the same way. If I gave that same F to a clarinet player and asked him to play it 2 or 3 times, every time he would play it, it would sound different. He would, unless I asked him to play it exactly the same way, because it's a living, breathing thing. I mean, there's phrasing. To listen to, like, as I said, my wife is a violinist. To listen to her play a violin line and then to listen to what a solo violin sounds like on a sampler is, I don't know, it's like eating muffins and then eating cardboard. I mean, it's very, very, very different. And the expression she has, and if you ask her to change the line, can you play a little bit more like this, or can you just do a little bit? That all happens within a second. But on a sampler, if you want to make some really changes in your sounds, you've got to start screwing around with with equalization or with digital delays and all these toys and things that you bring to it. So acoustical music has. There's also a. This sounds. Well, I mean, I mean this exactly as I say it. There's a personality in it that you can't get when you're just doing synthesized music. I think the Vienna Symphonic Library several years ago they may still have it, but they had a synth version of The Rite of Spring. It was brilliant. I mean, it was brilliant. It was done through all their samples. But after about 5 minutes, you realized it was a symphony being played by a bunch of dead guys because there was no life in it. And you could hear it. After a while, your mind starts to wander and the music kind of just goes on. Whereas if you have a live orchestra playing that, there's no way you can go to sleep because the music is so blessed interesting, or it just bangs a hole in your head, So yeah, I prefer to work on a piano because my imagination is geared towards that, and I can do much better on that than I can on anything else. And occasionally I write away from the piano as well. I mean, sometimes I'll just sit at the desk and write, but I prefer connecting with the sound.
I want to go back to a statement you made earlier about counterpoint. Now, what we know from recent research about the Italians and the Neapolitans and the Paris Conservatory is they had an extensive working of counterpoint from 2 voices all the way to 4-voice fugues. And they did this for many, many years, constantly lots of counterpoint. Now, you trained yourself in counterpoint. Can you talk about, but you also have a mastery of harmony. What's the difference between harmony and counterpoint? And can you talk about the importance of both?
Sure. Harmony is frozen counterpoint. It's all there is to it. Harmony counterpoint is one line against another line. Where the lines intersect, you get harmony. I mean, obviously, if there's 3 lines, you get more harmony than you're going to get if you have 2 lines, because the harmony is a little vague when there's only 2 lines, 2 notes against each other. But if you have 3 lines going and you stop at a point and it's C, E, G, you have a C chord. It's like that. That's basically how harmony came about. And then as the counterpoint became more aggressive, the harmony eventually became something in itself. I think at the very beginning it was just a single line, and then there were lines doubling each other, generally in fourths or something like that. The English started double in thirds, the Forward Bound. But eventually harmony became a thing in itself, and people were looking for more inventive harmonies. So you get to guys like Wagner, but Wagner's still basically writing counterpoint. I mean, he has very strong harmonies, but he's writing very strong lines. You look at Strauss, this guy's writing counterpoint, as is Tchaikovsky and all the guys. It even happens in songwriting, like when you get to a guy like George Gershwin, when you get into something like Porgy and Bess, that guy's writing counterpoint. He's writing the same way, the same techniques that Wagner was using, just using different chords and different alterations. But he has these lines going all over the place, creating these glorious harmonies. So the way I learned was you write, and this isn't writing just basic counterpoint, because as I said, I never studied it as a subject, but I learned you write the top line first, then you write the bass line, and then you figure out the harmonies from the bass line, because the bass line is really important. Well, geez, I mean, when you're doing songs, now I'm near my piano, so I'm going to do this. When you're doing songs that go like this, but what do you do for a bass line on that? I mean, you can do. It's because these are just parallel chords; they don't mean anything. But a lot of contemporary songwriting is written sort of like that, because they get a shape in their hand or they get a shape on the guitar. A friend of mine calls it the claw.
Yep.
And then move up and down the keyboard or up and down the fretboard.
Yep.
That's not. I mean, it's harmony, but it's not very interesting. It's because there's and you listen to the basses, and the basses generally are tied to a rhythm section, so the bass line may be a 2-bar figure repeated over and over and over, and when he goes from C to F, he takes the figure with him. So there's no creativity in the bass line in the way of trying to match it with a substantial melody. I mean, there is a lot of creativity in the bass line when these guys really get going, even on their simple chords. But it's a very different way of working. And the way of trying to find harmonies is pretty much limited to whatever you can come up with as your fingers just sort of fall on the keys.
How did you develop your counterpoint skill?
By learning how to do. I had a teacher who was very good at counterpoint. He said, I didn't challenge him on. I wish I'd challenged him on it. He said, I'm not going to teach you counterpoint, but we're going to be writing lines. So he would give me a line, and then he would make me write a counterline to it. And he would, we dealt with a little bit with canons and things like that, and the single lines. I mean, it was kind of primitive when you really look at it. A couple of years ago, I thought I should maybe read a book on it. So was it Proudest?
Ebenezer Proudest, yep.
Yeah, Proudest, okay, Proudest, yeah. So I got one of his books on, I think it was fugue writing. And I started looking at this, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was really an eye-opener. I'm reading all these rules about how to do things that I had learned how to do the hard way, because I had to discover them on my own. And I thought, geez, if I learned this stuff in college, I could have gotten really good at this. So I do it the hard way. I struggle, and I think being a brass player helped, because I learned the value of writing good lines when I'm writing instrumental music. I think that people who play in an orchestra have the advantage over people who never learn to play anything other than the piano, because they'll learn about phrasing, and they'll learn about breathing, they'll learn about independent lines as opposed to just a mass of chords going on all the time. Like pianists always tend to overwrite because they need to play a lot of notes because their sound is fading all the time.
Well, Bruce, can I ask you to comment on something? You're a great teacher and a professor. I'm actually also one of the young generation who kind of went through music college, and they taught me a lot of harmony. And I want to get your opinion on this. they teach us a lot about functions, how to analyze with chords, and this goes to that and this and this. And I got all this theory in my head, but I was never really a practical person in college. I was just taking theory exams. And then when I left college, I realized I couldn't write anything. So what happened was I realized there's something wrong here, and I wanted to read, it's something along the lines you were talking about, studying counterpoint and being practical. And how do you find that as a teacher? What's your opinion of the way theory is taught in college?
Oh, it stinks. Look, let me play you a little phrase. This actually came up in a college exam. This is one of the best exams I ever had. The guy wrote this down on a piece of paper. The teacher wrote this down on a piece of paper. See. He wrote those phrases down on the piece of paper, and he said, okay, identify the phrase, and then analyze it harmonically, and then relate the phrase of music to the composer's ideas on music and drama. And I thought that was a great question, because you can't analyze it musically because it's atonal. There's nothing in it. But the way the voices work is basically all counterpoint. I mean, it's incredible, right? So
that is Wagner, right, Bruce?
That's Wagner. Yeah, that's Tristan. And I often to say to people, if you can understand this, you understand chromatic harmony, and this is basically all you need to know about how to get harmony going. Now, because it's all lines and where the lines take you. Now, there's another thing that I learned from the guy that I was studying with. He said when it talks, because we went through harmony, and he went through it because he thought he should teach me something, so we went through a harmony book. But he was complaining practically the whole way. He says, look, the truth is any chord will go to any chord if it's prepared correctly. So I learned one day that when you're modulating, the way you learn in school to modulate is that you have to go from one key to another. So let's say you go from the key of C to the key of A flat. Okay, C has no flats in it, but A flat has 3 flats in it, right? So, or 4 flats in it. So you have to kind of noodle along and start inserting flats and to get into common keys before you can get to A flat. Well, maybe that works. I'm sure that does work. In fact, I'm sure a lot of people do it well, but there's actually an easier way of doing it. I'm in the key of C, and I want to go to A flat. There I am. So what I do is I go directly to the dominant. It's like the easiest thing in the world. And I learned that, fortunately, and found out that it was a good thing to learn when you're doing movies, because in movies, particularly if you're doing animation, sometimes you have to modulate very quickly. You're in the middle of a scene and you realize that in 2.5 bars, you need the trumpet to play in another key. And you've got 2.5 bars to get from that key to that key, And so you better figure out how to do it quickly and responsibly. When you look at guys like Schumann, Wagner's a good one, but Schumann, Mendelssohn, my Lord, Mendelssohn had a huge craft, and that guy could get from any key to any key.
Yeah.
He could do anything, harmonically.
Yeah.
But he didn't say, you can't go from C to B because that's going back, or you can't go from C to F sharp because you got tritones. That's nonsense. You can go to C to F sharp.
That's a question I want to ask you, Bruce, which is, when you're writing music, do you think in terms of, now I'm going to the subdominant, the median here? Do you have any of that theory in your head? No, I don't bother with things like that. I know what they are. I know the subdominant, the median, the submedian, all that kind of stuff. But I don't ever do that. And I don't deal with like the 2 of the 6. And I suspect really composers don't think like that. So
actually, I think you're wrong, because I think that a lot of composers do, and they teach theory. And that's why you didn't learn anything about theory, because these guys can't write music. All they can do is tell you what the function is. Look, I've got you'll enjoy this because you teach. So I came up with a little exercise one time, just in the top of my head. I was doing a class, and I was complaining to the students, I guess, that their sense of theory was really poor, and they didn't know how to modulate, and they didn't know how to move it. So what I did is I got up to the blackboard. I just improvised this. Got up to the blackboard, and I wrote a C chord. And then I wrote 3 empty bars, and then I wrote an F chord. I said, okay, now what I want you to do is I want somebody to come up here and fill in the 3 extra bars that takes the key of C to the key of F. Even though C is the dominant of F, we're going to start in C and we're going to end solidly in F. Who can do that? So a couple of guys got up and they tried it, and they stood there and they would make scratches at the board, and then they would make figures underneath, like the 2 of the 6 and the 3 goes, and none of them could do it. So I thought, oh, wow, that's really, now here's what, there's a lot of ways of doing it, but here's one. I'm sorry. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Oh, this is an easy way. There's another way. You do it stepwise. So I did this over and over and over again, and I realized, I've done it for several years. I found 2 people in all that time who could sort of do it.
That's astounding.
The things that I have found, just to modulate from C to F in 3 moves, without doing stupid things. And mostly I get a bunch of stupid, you get things that are unbelievable as being modulations. And these guys have all gone to school.
Right.
They've all studied theory and all that stuff. So I'm thinking they studied.
But they're very good at labeling stuff that you write.
I wouldn't want to label the stuff I write, because sometimes I just write linearly, and I know where I'm going. I know that I need this chord to go to that chord, and I want that voice to go to that voice. And so I'll work it out until I have the whole thing. But I never do it through functions. Functions are the most useless thing.
Oh.
What can you do? Well, look, you've got a chord like this. You've got a chord like this, which is a dominant 7th. So it's supposed to go here, but in fact it goes here, because it's not a dominant 7th. It's a augmented 6th. So that function, who cares? when you know that this note goes to here and this note goes to here, and that, it's just like, what's that function? And now you're lost. Okay, there you're on an E7, so you're obviously in the key of A, but you're not really.
Yep.
It's just.
That's Bruce, I'm getting goosebumps talking to you, but it makes me think that actually this idea all depends on where you want to go. It's all context and what you want to do. It's not necessarily something that you have to really. There's no perhaps inner function. It's really what you want to do, and you can really do a lot or anything you want, and that's not breaking anything. It's totally all valid.
No, actually, there are functions. I just don't bother dealing with the theory when I'm writing. If I have a problem and I really can't figure out what the heck I'm doing, I may delve into my theory and say, okay, just a minute, I'm in B flat. I'm trying to get to blah, 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 and how is it, I'll just look at it and figure it out in terms of structure. So it's not like I don't use theory at all. But theory is not how you write music. You write music with ideas, and the ideas have to be set in a certain way. And theory is there after the fact. It's music theorists who figured out theory, not the composers. And here's the other thing about it. When you have rules like you're not supposed to have parallel fifths, you're not supposed to have parallel octaves. A first inversion chord is not supposed to double the bass. Okay, let's use the last one. A first inversion chord. Here's an F chord in the first inversion. The A is in the bottom. A, F, C, F. Okay, that's the way it's supposed to sound. If you don't do that, if you double the third, it sounds crappy. It's actually, crappy isn't the right word. It sounds weak. So that's doubling the third. That's not doubling the third. So when you look at these rules of music, you realize they're not rules like a policeman's going to come and put you into jail if you use this. They're rules that are really not rules. They're really observations saying if you write it another way, like if you double the third, you're going to have a weak piece of music. So here's like one of the things is you're not supposed to have parallel octaves. Well, that's a really good observation, because octaves, aside from the fact that they don't give you independent lines, they always strengthen the bottom line. Always. You use octaves in orchestration to bring out inner lines. You use octaves in order to make something more colorful, like if you want to make a trumpet really bright, put a flute an octave above it. It'll brighten up. It'll sound like a flute. It'll sound like a trumpet rather, like a bright trumpet, because it's working on overtones. So you have to be careful using octaves, because octaves sometimes will either make your music weak or it'll bring something out that you never intended to be heard that strongly. All these things.
Let me bring up something you talked about earlier when you were talking about putting a melody and then writing a bass, and then that's almost like figured bass in the sense, which is kind of an older way of thinking in music theory. It's not like the more modern theories of the functions. Figured bass is a very old. I think it's not taught anymore, really, in the sense that it's, you're kind of composing up from the bass and you've got these harmonies in mind. Is that would you say that's kind of a more, instead of functions, you're thinking more like that a little bit, the older way?
I think that since Debussy came around, Debussy sort of killed the functions. Music like that. How are you going to do that with your bass lines? You're doing parallel chords here. There's a lot of music that's happened in the 20th century, which is just, it has nothing to do with Bach in the 18th century. But it's still a technique that can be used. If you're writing and I'll tell you a guy who used it again, I mentioned him earlier, is Gershwin. If you listen to Gershwin, he has bass lines. He has real bass lines. I was in the Library of Congress a couple of years ago, and there was a display of some sketches of Leonard Bernstein on West Side Story, and a sketch of, what's his name? The guy who wrote Showboat, Jerome Kern.
Yeah.
Jerome Kern. And they're just sketches of the songs. And you know what they had on the sketches? They had the melody and the bass line. I swear to God, they didn't have the harmony. They had the melody. I mean, occasionally they would write in a little bit of harmony, but basically when they're working out their tune, they're also writing the bass lines, because they know how important it is. You've got to have a good, solid bass. Now, you talked about figured bass. There's the Riemenschneider book of Bach chorales, has all the chorales that Bach wrote in all the cantatas and masses and all the settings he had of the chorales. He very often had set one or two chorales many, many, many times in different works, maybe sometimes 6 times, sometimes 3 times, whatever. So you can see in this collection how he set these chorales differently. And if you look at the basses are all different. And sometimes the basses take you to a completely different neighborhood than the bass in a previous version. Like, from this one, this goes from F to D. This one goes from F to B flat. But the tune is the same. So, you figure out your harmonies from the position of the bass and the melody.
Actually, Bruce, that reminds me of a biography I read of Brahms. Whenever he was confronted with a new composition, he would take 2 fingers and cover the middle voices and just look at the soprano and the bass.
Well, yeah, I can understand that. I can tell you, I think I mentioned Jerry Goldsmith earlier. A student asked Jerry Goldsmith one time, how do you write music? And he said, well, first I write something on top, and then I write something on bottom, and then I fill it in with all the other stuff. And the guy laughed who asked the question. But the person who told me the story was a really well-trained musician. And I looked at him, I said, but that's what you're supposed to do. And he says, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. You write the top, then you write the bottom, and then you write all the other stuff, Now, you can find a lot of people who didn't do that. I mean, I don't know that Bartók did that. I think Bartók could do it. I don't know that Stravinsky did that. I think Stravinsky.
Stravinsky was he was a real counterpoint enthusiast. In fact, I think I have a quote of him where he said harmony didn't interest him, but counterpoint very much.
Yeah, but in his writing, he had a lot of stuff where, I don't know. I mean, he had a lot of stuff where it was very chordal. But when you get into minimalism and stuff like that, it's a useless technique. You don't want to write bass lines to.
Yeah.
Anyway. I think there are a lot of different techniques to write music, and part of composing is the idea is the most important thing you can come up with. But the more techniques you have to work your ideas, the better off you are. And if you just learn one technique, it's going to be hard for you. It's because it's not going to work with everything. But there are some guys like, this was told to me like this. There are some workmen who have a lot of tools. And they're very good at what they do. They use all their tools. They know how to use their tools. But there are some workmen who are also highly skilled artists who don't have so many tools, but they know how to use the tools they have. So I think it's sort of like that. Just to say, here's here's a whole bunch of tools, now go build me a good table. You can't do that. You have to learn how this stuff works, you know? And I think that teaching music has really fallen apart in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of contemporary techniques which are really, really, really interesting. And obviously there's a lot of contemporary music that's really, really interesting that takes, severe techniques on their own. But if you can't do the easy stuff, and you can only do the hard stuff, I think you're crippled.
Oh, you have a quote. Let me read a quote that you said. You said, people look down their noses at melody, concert music too. If you write a melody, you're dead. But to write a great melody is really hard. So let's talk a little bit about melody and the importance of writing a melody. You mentioned that a student might write some strange things because maybe they're not used to writing melodies. Let's talk about melody now.
Well, several years ago, I was doing a class in film music. So we were talking about the different kinds of music to write for films. And I said, this week's assignment is going to be to write a romantic melody for a romantic drama. And I said, you decide how long or how short it's going to be, but it has to be a melody, not a motif, but a real melody. Well, I had something like 20 students. There wasn't anybody who actually wrote a melody. There were people who wrote these long, wandering, these tunes, that just kind of went on, and the lines all over the place. And some of them didn't even write that much. I mean, they had no concept of writing a melody. What I find now is that melody has sort of come back in some guys, like a guy like Hans Zimmer, who's, he's a very famous film composer. He wasn't trained like John Williams. I mean, John Williams obviously has a terrific education. Hans will tell you that he didn't have a great music education, but he gets along with what he does, but he can write a good tune. I wouldn't say that he's as sophisticated in harmonizing it or arranging it as someone like John Williams is, but he can write a good tune. Jerry Goldsmith could write a great tune. Henry Mancini, Lalo Schifrin, Michel Legrand, these guys, Larry Rosenthal, I mean, all these guys could really write great melodies. They could also write music that could just knock your socks off, So writing a tune, the advantage of writing a tune, particularly in film, is that it attaches itself to the story. It attaches itself to the film. And when you hear the tune, you think of the film, forever. And when you see the film and you hear the tune is actually giving you information because it's referring to a situation or maybe a very strong character. The best example of this is Jaws. If you didn't have that silly theme, if you didn't have that, you look at this and boy, it would be just a long fish movie. And I think even Steven Spielberg said that because that theme is so identifiable and so terrifying in certain spots where you think that the shark, if you've never seen the movie, you think, oh, the shark's going to be here any second, because the theme just works brilliantly with that movie. Star Wars is another one where those themes, which are pretty hackneyed now because now we got into Star Wars number 32 or whatever it is. Yeah. They keep using the same friggin' themes, but they're so identified with characters that you can hardly use one without using the other. So it's like I've on my things. This tune, Tiny Toons. Anybody who grew up with that show, as soon as you hear that, you know exactly what it is. There's another movie I did. That's Homeward Bound.
Beautiful.
So I've played that for kids in class, and they just about wet their pants because when they were little kids, they watched that movie over and over and over and over again, and just playing that tune brings them all this flood of memories.
Is that Bruce? Is that the concept of the leitmotif? Is that something that's important to you?
Sometimes I've tried to use it. You have to be really careful with it because sometimes it can get really hackneyed and it can get identified very carefully with something in the picture too early. And then, if it's not used well, it's going to come back and annoy people like crazy. I mean, even melodies can annoy people. I remember years ago, I went to an Italian movie and there was this very Italian melody in it. It came out at the very beginning and it always came out as a full-blown melody, like the Italian movies used to do. And about 20 minutes into the movie, the guy in front of me started singing the tune. It was really annoying. But that was only because the tune had already hit in his ears, and every time the tune came in, oh, here's that tune again. So when you've got a really identifiable tune, oh, well, actually, this is a classical problem. A guy like Haydn wrote these really simple, very clear melodies, often. Like this one, I mean, what could be more simple than that? If you get a tune like that, you learn it immediately. The first time you hear it, it's in your ear. So the second time you hear it, you say, oh, there's that tune again. The third time you're hearing it, you're saying, yeah, okay, I know that tune. And the fourth time you're hearing it, it's okay, play something else, because it gets to be, it's so simple and so immediate. So what Haydn did, and you can see this in like a ton of his symphonies, a ton of his works, he would write a little tune like that, and they're great tunes, but the second time they came out, he would do a variation of it. The third time, he would do another variation. And so every time the tune would come back, and you never got annoyed at it because you never knew how it was going to be set. So he had this student named Beethoven. Guess what? Beethoven does the same thing. He learned it from Haydn. It's brilliant. I mean, you can't listen to the same thing over and over and over again without going nuts. So you do variations on them. And it's really kind of we do the same thing in movies. At least I do, like on that Homeward Bound thing. I remember working on the movie, and there was a spot where I really needed to use it, but I needed to use it in the scene right before it. And I thought, gee, if I use it in both scenes, it's going to drive people nuts by the time it gets to the second scene. So what I did is the first scene, I did a variation of it, and then I went to the full statement of the theme on the second scene, and it worked great. Well,
Bruce, I like to end interviews off on the theme of fun, so I have a hot seat, and I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. You don't have to take the answers so seriously, just whatever comes to mind, and I'd just like to knock these out, a bunch of them fast. So, are you ready?
So you just want free association?
Anything that comes to mind, I'll just ask you. So, if you could go back in time and talk to any composer you'd like, who would it be?
Oh, so many guys. I think I'd like to talk to Bach, if not take lessons with him.
And what would you talk about?
I'd talk to him about technique and how he made music out of it. I mean, that guy has almost invisible technique. His music gets to be so powerful, and yet he does things in it that I just my jaw drops.
What was the hardest gig that you had to write?
It was probably it was one of two gigs where I had to change everything. One score where the director kept wanting me to make changes and everything I wrote, and so I changed every piece in it. And another one where the director hated what I had written to start with, and he made me fix everything. So those two were hard.
Is that Peter Heim?
Yeah, Peter made me.
I saw that in another interview.
Actually, this is not to take a chop at Peter. I've told the story a lot. Peter actually made me do it again, and I gave him the out. I said, you can hire somebody else. He says, I'm not going to do that. It was your job. You screwed it up. You fix it. So I fixed it.
And he liked it. He liked it very much.
I learned a lot from Peter. I'll tell you, he was tough. He was demanding. He knew what he wanted.
Okay, so then by contrast, what was the easiest job that you had? Relative to the amount of work and consequence, what was the easiest then?
Oh, there have been a couple of jobs where I just really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the movie. One was Baby's Day Out. One was a TV movie based on a Mark Twain book, Roughing It. There were a couple of other things I did for TV that I really enjoyed. I used to really enjoy working on Dallas. I used to enjoy working on Quincy. I loved all the people who worked on it. We used to we were like a big family. We'd sit and we'd laugh together and have lunches and all this. And it was always fun. It was just really a lot of fun. So I don't know. I had a lot of those. I was going to say Rescuers Down Under was another one it was a hard job, but that was fun because the people were, the movie was really good and the people were spectacular. So
what is the most extreme work you've had, like in terms of time, where you're up writing and you had a really killer deadline? What's the most, can you think of an extreme example in your career?
Yeah, I had one day, I don't remember what it was. It was it was a one-day job where I had to write something like 8 minutes of music. And I thought I was going to die because that was a lot for me. I don't remember what it was, but I remember it wasn't a lot of fun. And I can't say that it turned out to be the greatest thing I ever wrote.
Okay, now I want to ask you top 3 classic music film scores. What are if just, I mean, there's many, but of course you choose 3 of the classic film scores. So maybe the older movies.
Well, I'm not a film music historian or even film music. I'm not that knowledgeable about it, but from my personal list off the top of my head, I would say Chinatown by Jerry Goldsmith, Spartacus by Alex North. There's a Miklos Rocha movie I like a lot, Double Indemnity. I mean, there are other ones too, but those 3 kind of jump out at me.
What is your proudest musical moment?
Maybe Tiny Toons, because it's so silly, I don't know. I've surprised myself several times when I wrote things that I thought was beyond my ability, and I think, and actually, no, I can give you a better answer. That my proudest moments extend to today, when I get emails from people I've never heard of, who just want to write me to thank me for the music I wrote 20 or 30 years ago, and how much pleasure they get out of hearing it, and how much it's meant to them, and sometimes how it's made them want to become a composer. That kind of stuff makes me feel better than anything, really. I mean, that's when you realize that the music you're doing, you're not invisible, and you're not playing music to deaf people. They're actually paying attention. So yeah, that's the best thing for me. I really never get tired of that, and it happens fairly often.
This is an off-the-wall question. If you were not in music, what would you do? Oh, okay, animator, right? Let's forget about that.
No, I'm glad I wasn't an animator, because I worked with them and I realized how good they were. No, I wouldn't want to be an animator now. I don't know. I thought it'd be interesting to be a psychologist or maybe a writer. I think I would stay in a creative field. I like psychology because I like working with meaning, but I like writing because it's creative. It's not that different from composing. Yeah, those are the 2 that come to mind, first of all.
If an alien came to Earth and said, we would like to hear the music of Bruce Broughton, what 3 works would you give them?
I really don't know. I don't know. That's sort of like asking me, what's my favorite music of mine? I couldn't tell you. I like a lot of the pieces for different reasons. Some of the pieces I don't like as much as other people like. Some pieces I like more than other people like. I have attachments to them all. Sometimes my favorite piece is the one I just finished. I don't know. I like the score to Young Sherlock Holmes. I like the score to Miracle on 34th Street. I like the score to Baby's Day Out. I like the score to Silverado's okay. I like I don't know. There's several of them I like. A few I'm not so crazy about. I don't know. There are some classical things I like, but nobody knows those, so I wouldn't give those to the aliens.
Top 3. Now this is just quick for not related to composition, but top 3 pianists. Who are your favorite pianists? Top 3.
Oh gosh, Alfred Brendel is right at the top. What's your Yuja Wang? I think Ashkenazi is. I mean, there are a lot of terrific pianists. I've heard Ashkenazi play things that are just so fabulously played. Yeah, those 3 guys come to mind. Or they're not all guys. 2 guys and a woman. Brendel, I've heard Brendel play. He's so musical. And Yuja, she played. I mean, she's got a fearsome technique, but she's got a lot of music in her too. I mean, she's like a force of nature, There are other people though. I mean, there are other people. I like really musical playing. I'll tell you, I've learned a lot about listening to music since I married my wife, because she's a performer. And it used to be, we found out at the very beginning that she listens to performance. I listen to construction. But after being with her, I listen a lot to performance. I'm much more careful about how people perform things than I ever was before. And I find a lot of composers, when they get their music performed, they don't ask enough out of the performance. I have a friend who's a pretty good composer, and he's had a lot of his pieces recorded, but they're lousy recordings because all they do is play the notes. And he's happy. He thinks that that's what it sounds like. But I'm thinking, no, actually, if they knew how to perform it, this would be a much better piece, So performance is a big thing. But of the three pianists off the top of my head, those three are awfully good.
Who are your favorite classical composers?
Bach. I can give you four. Bach, Wagner, Debussy, and Bartók.
If you were on a desert island, what music would you bring with you?
I would probably bring all the Bach cantatas and the 48 preludes and fugues, because I think I could listen to those over and over and over and over and over again and never get tired of them. I would probably bring, if not the entire Ring cycle, at least Götterdämmerung, which I think is a fabulous piece. There are lots of pieces of Stravinsky I'd bring, a few pieces of Hindemith. I like the Lutoslawski piano concerto. I might bring that. I don't know. I'd bring the Bartók. I'd bring a bunch of Bartók. I don't know. I'd bring a lot of Rachmaninoff too. I think there's a whole bunch of his stuff I'd take. I'd bring a lot of music.
What are you still learning? You've mentioned that you're always learning something new all the time. What are the things that you are actively looking for to add to your toolkit?
Well, this may sound kind of funny, but because I've been teaching, I learned one thing is that it's a stupid thing to whine about your lack of technique or your lack of brilliance or why your piece is turning out badly. It's just because you're not as good as somebody else. I found that the key to really good writing is not to give up on it. It's just to keep finding ways of correcting your mistakes, of making your music better. Like I spend a lot more time now. If I have a deadline, obviously I can't do this, but I'm much more careful now. I write and I don't let the piece go until I'm happy with all of it, I find myself, when I finished a piece, looking at it and going, oh, no, I need 2 more bars there, or I don't need that, so I'll just pull out 13 or 14 bars, something like that. And I'm working with form all the time. I'm working with different lines. I'm working with sounds that I'm trying to get to be very specific. So occasionally I'll see something that a student does. I'm thinking, oh, that's a good idea. Hadn't thought about doing that. I will hear a new piece, maybe a new technique that has something in it that, I might try out myself. I'm just open to a lot of stuff. I'm still trying to write interesting music, but I like music for different combinations, different kind of groups. I guess that's because of my film background. I like what I have done with film and television and animation and theme parks and the video game and all that stuff. But I'm also like writing pieces for solos, for bands, for orchestras, for chamber groups, different kinds of instruments, different kinds of combinations. I've written a tuba concerto, a piccolo concerto. They both do pretty well. They both get played. I've written pieces for like a tuba quartet, tuba octet. These weird combinations that you have to work at, and they're just really interesting.
That kind of parlays into a quick follow-up question is, how are you different as a composer today versus 20, 30 years ago?
I can do more. I have a much better technique. I write far fewer duller pieces than I used to. I used to have every once in a while when I was in my 20s, I could write a pretty good piece, which would take me a long time. And then I'd follow it up with just a piece of junk, and I would get absolutely stuck as to what to write and beat myself up for it and all that kind of stuff. I don't do that anymore. If I sit down and I'm ready to write, I sit down and I'm ready to write. And if I don't get to the right idea for a little while, then I'll just keep spinning it until I get the right idea. And I may set it 2 or 3 times differently until I get the way to do it. I just keep at it. And I think that came about because doing all that television, I had to write it. I couldn't just think about it. I couldn't think about whether it was good or bad or whether it was the best or whether it sounded like Bartók or whether it sounded like so-and-so. I just eventually had to write it. And I found out very quickly that often what I thought was just a bunch of junk worked really great, it was just absolutely the right thing that the program needed. So I think all those years of writing, I mean, look, I've been writing music for over 50 years. So you can imagine someone like John Williams, he's a few years older than I am. He's been writing music for well over 60 years. So he sort of knows how to do it, So I don't think any of us write the way we do. I mean, occasionally I see movies or hear movies or somebody talks to me about a score that they like that I wrote 30 years ago, and I listen to it and I think, well, that's great, but I wouldn't write. I mean, I guess I could write like that, but I don't think I would write like that anymore. I just have gotten better in a different direction. So I think I got better. I think I'm writing well. I think I write better now than I ever did. But I look back on some of the older things I did, and I thought, well, that was pretty good too. So I don't know. It's just kind of fun to keep going.
Well, the great Bruce Broughton, the master, and probably the most modest man I've ever met. It's such a treat to have you on the show, and an honor for me. And your wisdom, you have inspired so many people, and your music has delighted audiences. And you still continue to create amazing, masterful music. Thank you so much for being on the show. Would you like to mention any upcoming events or projects you're working on for my audience?
No, but I would like to mention how easy it's been to talk to you, and that you've come up with a lot of questions, and we've talked about a lot of things that I've never, ever talked about on a podcast before. And I really appreciate that. Things coming up. What do I have coming up? I don't know. I never have known what was coming up. I never knew whether I'd be working next week or not. So I may have something coming up that you're interested in. I don't know. If anybody watches The Orville, the TV show, it's going on its third season on Hulu. I don't know what it does in your country, but on Hulu.
Yep.
Because of Hulu. Hulu has a slightly different format, so Seth MacFarlane asked me to do a different version of the main title, which for the one that's been playing all along has been a minute long. Now we have a main title that's going to be a minute and a half, completely different arrangement, and that might be kind of fun to listen for whenever that happens, But as far as the other stuff that I'm doing a lot of stuff that probably you'd be better off being a performer to hear. And it probably won't go on television right away.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce, for being on the show. It's been a real honor, and I hope to talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.